In the dusty back roads of Mississippi stood a weathered farmhouse. Its white paint had long since peeled away, leaving wood scarred by storms and sun. The fields, once alive with cotton and corn, now stretched dry and lifeless, weeds crawling where harvests used to grow. Inside lived Thomas and Martha Johnson, an elderly black couple in their late 70s. Their hands told the story of decades, calloused, scarred, and worn down by years of labor. Every wrinkle on their skin carried the weight of survival in a world that had never made things easy for people like them. Thomas had been a sharecropper most of his life, working land that never really belonged to him. Martha had raised children who weren't even hers by blood. Together, they had built something from nothing. They had opened their home to the abandoned, the lost, the forgotten. But now, in their twilight years, their once bustling home was silent. Years ago, Thomas and Martha had taken in 3 children, siblings who had been abandoned by their birth parents. They raised them as their own, giving them food, shelter, and love when no one else wanted them. They gave them the Johnson name, taught them values, prayed over them every night. But time had a cruel way of twisting things. As the children grew up, they began to see the farm not as home, but as a burden. They didn't want the hard life of dirt under their nails and sweat dripping down their backs. They looked at Thomas and Martha as reminders of struggle, of poverty, of a life they wanted to leave behind. So one by one, they drifted away. At first, they promised to visit. At first, they called. But eventually, the phone stopped ringing. Letters stopped coming. Holidays passed in silence. Until finally, the Johnsons were left alone, abandoned by the very children they had poured their souls into raising. The hurt cut deeper than any physical pain. Thomas would sit on the porch in his rocking chair, staring at the dirt road, hoping maybe one of them would drive up. Martha would set an extra plate at the table out of habit, then quietly put it away when dinner ended in silence. Neighbors noticed. Folks in town whispered. Some even mocked, saying, "That's what you get for raising kids that ain't yours." But Thomas and Martha never spoke badly of their children. They carried the pain silently, swallowing their sorrow like bitter medicine. Still, in the quiet of the night, Martha would cry herself to sleep, clutching an old photograph of the kids in their younger days. Thomas would turn his face to the wall so she wouldn't see his tears. They had weathered storms together, but this storm, the storm of abandonment, was the hardest. With no children to help, survival became harder each year. The farm barely produced enough to feed them, let alone sell. The house needed repairs they couldn't afford. Thomas's back ached too much to work long hours, and Martha's arthritis made even simple chores painful. Yet they carried on. They planted a small garden behind the house. They raised a few chickens for eggs. They learned to live with less. But poverty is cruel. Medical bills piled up. Old debts resurfaced. Some nights, they went to bed hungry, choosing to keep the lights on instead of filling their stomachs. The children never called, never asked how they were doing, never sent a dime to help. It was as if Thomas and Martha had never existed. Around them, the world seemed to move forward. New roads were paved, new businesses popped up, the town grew richer. But their farm remained the same, stuck in time, stuck in struggle. They became invisible. The community rarely checked in, and even the church, once their sanctuary, grew distant. The pews they used to fill every Sunday sat empty, and no one came asking why. Thomas and Martha felt forgotten by the world, forgotten by their children, forgotten by God Himself. But life has a way of surprising you when you least expect it. Because hidden beneath the cracked soil and rotting wood of that old farmhouse was a secret neither of them had ever imagined. A secret that would change everything. One summer evening, the skies over Mississippi opened up in fury. Rain hammered the tin roof of the farmhouse. Wind howled through the cracks, and lightning split the sky wide open. Thomas and Martha sat huddled in the living room, a single lantern glowing. Water leaked from the ceiling, dripping into buckets they had set out years ago and grown accustomed to. The storm outside mirrored the storm in their hearts. The loneliness, the weight of being forgotten, the heaviness of age pressing down on them with every creak of their bones. As thunder rattled the walls, Thomas whispered a quiet prayer in his heart, asking God for strength. He didn't ask for riches or glory. He only asked for the will to keep going. That night, as the storm raged, something shifted. The wind tore through an old barn window out back, shattering glass and ripping loose boards from the frame. When the storm passed, the barn looked wounded, its insides exposed, and in that storm's destruction lay the first clue to their future. The morning after, Thomas went out to inspect the damage. The barn had been in bad shape for years, but now it looked close to collapse. The roof sagged, the floorboards buckled, and part of the back wall had been torn away by the storm. As he stepped inside, his boots pressed against warped wood. Dust swirled around him like ghosts from the past. For decades, this barn had been the heartbeat of the farm, storing feed, tools, and memories. But now, it was a skeleton of what it used to be. In the corner, hidden behind fallen boards, Thomas noticed something strange. The storm had unearthed a section of floor that looked different. A trapdoor covered in dirt and half-rotted planks. Curiosity tugged at him. He pulled the boards aside, revealing rusty hinges and a padlock so old it crumbled at his touch. The trapdoor groaned as he forced it open, revealing a dark space below. Beneath the barn lay a hidden cellar, untouched for decades. The air was stale, thick with the smell of dust and mold. Wooden shelves lined the walls, stacked with jars, crates, and old chests. Cobwebs hung like curtains, and rats scurried at the sound of movement. Martha came out to join him, holding a flashlight. Together they descended into the darkness, each step echoing like footsteps through time. Down there, among forgotten relics of the past, they found something that made their hearts stop. An old trunk, bound in iron, with initials carved into the lid. H.J. Thomas froze. He recognized the initials immediately. They belonged to his grandfather, Henry Johnson, a man who had once owned more land than anyone in the county, but who had died mysteriously poor, his fortune supposedly lost. With trembling hands, Thomas and Martha pried open the trunk. Inside, they found papers wrapped in oilcloth to keep out moisture. The documents were yellowed with age, but still intact. Deeds, titles, certificates. One after another, they revealed a truth long buried. Henry Johnson had never lost his land. He had hidden it away, transferring ownership quietly before his death. The land Thomas and Martha lived on wasn't just a small farm. It was part of a massive inheritance, hundreds of acres stretching farther than the eye could see. There were also envelopes of old cash, bonds, and even letters Henry had written, explaining his decision. He hadn't trusted the banks. He hadn't trusted the system that had always cheated black folks out of what was rightfully theirs. So he had hidden everything, waiting for the right hands to discover it. And now, decades later, those hands were Thomas and Martha's. At first, it didn't feel real. They sat in the dim cellar, papers spread out around them, too stunned to move. The weight of generations pressed down on their shoulders. For years, they had struggled in poverty. For years, they had believed they were barely scraping by. For years, they had thought their children abandoned them because they had nothing to give. But all this time, beneath their feet, they had been sitting on a fortune. Not just money, not just land, but legacy. Their family had been robbed by history, by racism, by a system that tried to erase black wealth before it could even exist. Yet somehow, Henry Johnson had outsmarted it. He had preserved a treasure that now lay in Thomas and Martha's hands. The realization hit them hard. Tears welled in Martha's eyes. Thomas's chest heaved with a mix of joy and sorrow. They had been abandoned, forgotten, left behind. But God hadn't forgotten them. That night, Thomas and Martha couldn't sleep. They lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling, hearts racing with thoughts of what this inheritance meant. It wasn't about fancy cars or big houses. They had lived too long to be fooled by glitter and gold. It was about freedom. The freedom to fix the farmhouse, the freedom to pay off debts, the freedom to breathe without fear of bills piling up. It was about legacy, the chance to build something that would outlast them, the chance to bless others who had been forgotten the way they once were. For the first time in years, hope lit up their hearts like a fire in the night. News in small southern towns doesn't stay hidden for long. When Thomas went into town a week later to quietly ask about land deeds and property taxes, a clerk at the county office recognized his name. The whispers started almost immediately. Folks began talking. Didn't they say Old Man Johnson's land was gone? Word is Thomas Johnson's sitting on something big. Y'all hear the farm ain't as broke as it looks? By the time Thomas and Martha returned home, the air felt different. The farm hadn't changed, but eyes were on them now. Watchful, curious, hungry eyes. And it didn't take long for those whispers to reach the ears of their estranged children. The Johnson kids, grown adults now, hadn't stepped foot on the farm in years. They lived in cities, chasing dreams of wealth and status, ashamed of the humble roots that had raised them. But the rumor of hidden inheritance spread fast. One by one, they got calls from friends and neighbors. Y'all know your parents sitting on land worth millions? Word is, they've been holding out on you. If I was you, I'd go see about it before somebody else does. Greed stirred in their hearts like a wildfire. Children who once ignored their parents' calls suddenly remembered the road back home. It started with the oldest son, David. He pulled up in a shiny car, wearing a pressed suit that screamed success. He stepped onto the farm with forced confidence, calling out as if he'd been a dutiful son all along. Thomas and Martha stood on the porch, silent, weary, hearts torn. They hadn't seen their boy in nearly 10 years. Now he smiled wide, arms open, pretending the past didn't exist. Behind that smile, though, was calculation. His eyes scanned the land, the barns, the house. He wasn't here for love. He was here for claim. Word spread even faster after David's visit. Within weeks, all their children had returned. Cars lined the dirt driveway. luxury vehicles too big for the gravel road, outspilled sons and daughters dressed in designer clothes, carrying fancy handbags, and wearing expensive watches. They strutted like strangers on their parents' soil. Their laughter was loud, their hugs rehearsed, their words dripping with false sweetness. But Thomas and Martha saw through it all. They weren't fools. These weren't prodigal children coming home with humility. These were vultures, circling, waiting to feed. At first, the children cloaked their greed in politeness. They asked gentle questions about the land. They hinted at helping manage things for their parents. But soon, masks fell away. They demanded answers. They accused Thomas of hiding money. They blamed Martha for raising them in poverty while sitting on fortune. The couple, heartbroken, listened as the kids twisted love into entitlement. Every word cut deeper than knives. The children who had abandoned them now stood bold, claiming rights to an inheritance they hadn't earned, hadn't even asked about until money was involved. Thomas and Martha didn't raise their voices. They didn't argue. They simply went quiet. The kids raged, shouting in the farmhouse kitchen, throwing accusations across the worn wooden table. But the old couple sat still, weathered hands folded, eyes full of sorrow. Their silence spoke louder than words. You left us. You forgot us. And now you return only for gold. When silence didn't work, the children grew crueler. They threatened legal action. They said ugly things about race, about being raised poor, about being ashamed of their black parents while trying to live in a whitewashed world. Each word stabbed deeper. Each insult tore open wounds. Thomas and Martha thought had healed. It wasn't just greed. It was rejection of identity, rejection of roots, rejection of love. One night, after yet another argument, Martha sat at the kitchen table long after everyone had gone to bed. Tears streamed down her face as she stared at the old trunk, still holding deeds and letters from Henry Johnson. She thought of the years she and Thomas had given, working, sacrificing, loving children who now despised them. She thought of how those same children had abandoned them when all they had was each other. And now they came crawling back, not for reconciliation, but for fortune. Martha whispered into the night, her heart breaking, Lord, give us the strength to do what's right. Thomas reached out to a lawyer, a man known for handling land disputes. He brought him to the farm, laid out the deeds, the titles, the letters from Henry Johnson himself. The lawyer read carefully, nodding. Then he looked at the elderly couple with steady eyes. This inheritance, it belongs to you, not your children, not anyone else. The land, the assets, the bonds, they are legally, rightfully yours. For the first time, Thomas and Martha felt a measure of peace. The law was on their side. But deep down, they knew the real battle wasn't about legality. It was about family. When the kids learned about the lawyer, fury erupted. They accused Thomas and Martha of betrayal, of cutting them out, of choosing money over blood. The irony was bitter. For years, those same children had chosen pride, vanity, and distance over love. But now, when money was on the line, they dared to twist the story. The farmhouse echoed with shouting. The land that had once carried laughter now shook with anger. Neighbors began to notice. The quiet farm became a stage for ugly drama. Word of the feud spread beyond town. Some shook their heads, whispering about ungrateful children. Others pitied Thomas and Martha, knowing the pain of being abandoned. Strangers began showing support. Groceries left on the porch. Letters slipped into the mailbox. A church choir even visited, singing hymns under the stars to remind the couple they weren't alone. Thomas and Martha realized something powerful. Even if their blood had turned against them, their community hadn't. Finally, the truth came to light. A neighbor had secretly recorded one of the children's rants, full of entitlement, racism, and greed. The video spread online, sparking outrage. Comments poured in. Those parents gave them everything, and this is how they repay it? Money don't make family. Love does. Bless those elders. They deserve peace, not pain. Public opinion turned harshly against the children. Their reputations crumbled. Their shiny lives in the city started to unravel. Meanwhile, Thomas and Martha were lifted up as symbols of resilience. One evening, after the dust had settled, Thomas and Martha sat on their porch. The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky gold and crimson. The land stretched before them, acres upon acres, now theirs without question. But more importantly, they had something money couldn't buy: dignity. They had survived abandonment. They had endured betrayal. And in the end, they had reclaimed not only their inheritance, but their pride. Martha leaned into Thomas, her voice soft. All those years we thought we was left with nothing. Turns out we had everything that mattered. Love, faith, and each other. Thomas nodded, eyes fixed on the horizon. Money comes and goes. Kids may turn their backs. But what's meant for us, what God's stored up for us, can't nobody take away. The cicadas sang their evening song. The farmhouse glowed warm against the twilight. And for the first time in decades, peace wrapped itself around the Johnsons like a long-awaited embrace, because the greatest inheritance wasn't land. It wasn't money. It was the unshakable truth. They had survived, and they had won.